folks like you in 44 counties with GOP activists and leaders and Tea Party leaders and folks who care, like I just said, about this process. Building a relationship. I have relationships with national people, with conservative leaders nationally and in our state. I'm going to ramp up our small donor and our large donor process because we have to have a successful fundraising arm in both areas. I think it comes through relationships. I also think it comes through trust. You know, we talked a little bit ago about just learning how to build those relationships and getting the trust of people. Having people who back up that platform. When we have a consistent conservative message as Republicans, and there's no confusion out there, it's easy to tell people and to talk them into investing in what we're doing. Because they want to be a part of the winning team. They know we're on top, but they also know we're at a crucial point in history. We need their help. We've got to have somebody who doesn't mind going out, meeting those big donors and meeting the small donors, and making them understand this is the place to invest their time, their money, and their resources, because we do need to build a permanent conservative majority in South Carolina to lead the way in the nation.
We first have to make the Republican Party a party that we're proud of, a party that we can sell to other people in South Carolina that they can be proud of as well. The point is, it doesn't matter what sort of a system you use for small donors or large donors, if you're going out trying to raise money for a party that doesn't have a backbone, for a party that doesn't know what it stands for. Look at it. Right now, this is going on in Washington. Some of the Republican leaders are suggesting that we should agree to a budget for 2011 that cuts $40 billion out of the budget when the amount of the budget that's being borrowed, $1.5 trillion, is out there. We don't have that money, we're spending it. And they want to cut $40 billion and tell you that that's satisfactory. Last Friday, when they had to vote on the continuing resolution, there were only 28 Republicans who voted no. I was proud of each of those 28 Republicans. Here's the good news. 5 of those are Republican congressmen from South Carolina. How about that for our delegation? Every single member of the House of Representatives from the state of South Carolina that has a R after their name, they get it. And they did exactly the right thing, but there were only 28 total Republicans. And I go back to that point because we have a real battle here. The Tea Party bubbled up after the Obama election, and that's the same thing that brought me back to, and the reason I'm running today, because despite my involvement over time in the Republican Party, I basically said, with what I saw going on in the Bush years, if that's the Republican Party, I don't want to be a part of that. I saw the Tea Party come along for the same reasons that I did, saying maybe now there are people who think like I do. I see the Tea Party as the cavalry coming over the hill. If there are enough folks out there that think like I do, that we really need to stand up and make a difference, that's how we'll raise money for the Republican Party. When people see that we have principles, that we stand to defend the Constitution of the United States, that we're going to seek to cut the budget and seek to get the federal government back operating in a manner consistent with the Constitution, I believe then people will write the small checks and people will write the large checks when they're asked. I'm not afraid at all to go and ask all folks to write checks of that nature. But again, it has to be a product that you're proud to sell, and I will be proud to sell the Republican Party to anybody when the Republican Party stands up for those issues. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, by background, I'm not a salesman. By background, what you see is what you get. And it was interesting early on, I talked to someone before I started my campaign and said, you know, really haven't done this fundraising stuff. You know, what do you tell me? He said, you know, Billy, you're selling yourself short. Because people see you and what they see is real. And what they see when they look in your eye is you mean what you say. You put your life on the line, you came back, and you show dedication. And here's the thing is that when people give to something, they give because they believe in it. And I went out and Lieutenant Governor's race, and over 15 months raised almost $500,000. And I got to tell you, it started hard. It was pulling teeth because, again, started the first Tea Party, and those are the people that I was associated with, and had to learn to get small donations from many donors. And that was one of the talking points early on, was that I had other competitors in that race who had humongous donations from a very small number. And what I did is had a great number of people with small donations. But what I found was, as momentum built, is I was able to look them in the eye and say, look, I'm not going to tell you what you want to hear. I'm going to tell you what you need to hear. They started giving. And toward the end of my campaign, I started getting the bigger $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 checks. I say all this because we can say all we want about it. I'm sure most of us will put together a team of good finance people to help us out. One thing I found was all the team can do is get you that contact. In the end, you've got to make the trip out there. You've got to sit down with people. And in 15 months, I don't know how, I spent probably 80% of my time raising funds because I had to keep the campaign going. I learned a lot. And it's one of the reasons that drove me, and I'll talk more about that, into the process was that there's probably no better job to help you get ready to be chairman than a hard-fought constitutional office statewide campaign. And that's what does qualify me in this case for things like fundraising and being credible and going out and doing the job as chairman. Thank you very much.
Mr. Brown, if elected, do you plan to keep the consultant and staff levels of the South Carolina GOP at the same levels? Or do you plan to have less staff? If you plan to make cuts, what positions would you cut?
Well, you threw in there consultants and staff, so let me address both. First of all, there's no question that consultants play a role, but there's been an issue with the way consultants do their job, and there's a real issue with ethics. You know, I was telling some people the other day, you know, people sometimes pick on lawyers and are trying to decide, you know, where lawyers and political consultants fall on the scale. You can debate that point. But at least we do have ethics that we follow. And I raised this point the other day because, you know, there's a good friend of mine actually working for Chad, and I thought, gee, if I turned around and sued him, he'd have a problem with that. But I wouldn't sue my good friend because we have ethics in that regard. But in terms of, to the extent that the party needs to use consultants on occasion, you hire them out on a bid basis. If there's a need, like any other business, you meet that need. You look to see who can provide the service, you seek a bid, you choose generally the lowest price, not necessarily, depending on what service they're going to provide, and you go from there. No need to have anybody on retainer, and you just do it on a bid basis, case by case. As far as staff is concerned, I have not determined who I would hire or exactly which positions I would hire. There are certain obvious things that you need. There'll be an executive director, there'll be someone that will handle the political operations, so there'll be several staff members. I've not yet determined who those will be. But I think I would probably keep roughly the same number that we have now. Now, if we go out and raise enough money and you have needs for some additional persons, then so be it. But I would expect at least to start out with a very lean and mean machine operation, because I'll tell you, the biggest single task this next chairman is going to have is to run and pay for and organize the presidential preference primary. In 2008, it was paid for by the state of South Carolina. Actually, you paid for it with your tax dollars. In 2012, we don't know yet how it's going to be handled. There's a bill in the General Assembly which could pass. The governor's threatened to veto it. We don't know where that's going to end up. But I'm making plans, and I'm preparing to organize and run and pay for that primary. It's going to take a lot of money to do that. So we'll be looking to raise probably in excess of $1 million just to put on that presidential preference primary.
Thanks, a great question. I do want to separate it out. I've spoken about the consulting issues, and here's one of the things is when I decided to run a short time ago, it was such a passion on my heart that, say, you know, win or lose, if you can bring into discussion the issue of the consulting system in South Carolina, you will have been successful in something that has really been placed on my heart. Because this is an issue that many need to know about. And I want to start by saying there are plenty of good, hard-working consultants, and actually for the party, they can use, again, on retainer, using consultants to help out. My father was a military consultant after he retired from the military. It can be an honorable profession. Where it crosses the line is when you have massive conglomerates of consulting groups, and it ends up being one where you're told as a new candidate, you must pick XYZ consulting group or you'll never win. Because their candidates will get all the endorsements, they'll get all the donor lists, they'll get all this stuff, and all the people on the inside know this. The problem is a lot of the voters don't. So there's smoke and mirrors out there, and they wonder, okay, why did we pick the best candidate we could have in this primary? Well, sometimes it's because there's not enough transparency toward the consulting groups. If we open this stuff up, and also other things like open bidding. Right now, we've got a system where in general, there's a de facto answer, is that vendor bids have been going to different consulting groups. What I like to do is open the bid up across the state and say, look, if you're a conservative mom and pop shop in Lexington, South Carolina, and you provide a better service for a better price, then you get the vendor bids. Now, the consulting groups aren't going to let you say that, but it's the way things should work as Republicans. Those are things better than at the state level. State level, I think, is actually fairly lean as far as the staff goes. One of the first things, and I've talked to Karen about this, is I want to lead by example, and I want to do a quick study on things like the party Lincoln. And if it saves money for me to sell the Lincoln, I will do that. I'll look for that. Now, of course, it turns out it's not saving money, I won't do that. But those are ways I look through each one. I have promised nobody a position on my staff. And so on that end, thank you.
Couple things. No question, open bidding and no retainers for consultants. That'll go a long way. there's no doubt that'll help just clean up some of the retainer stuff and some of the conglomerates that are working out there, because there are some great consultants. There's no question there are some that, when I'm chairman, are going to have a harder time based on reputation working for the party as well. But I also think this goes to the staff issue, because if you have a staff that's a lean team and you pick people who are talented in a lot of areas, think about having an executive director who can write mail. Or think about having the political director who can also help you with polling questions and, design or articulation, writing the copy for mail pieces that go out. So that everything doesn't have to be hired out. So I think this goes back to who you put in those places. I do believe Karen's run a pretty lean ship over there, and I asked her the question when I first got started running about 5 months ago. And I don't want to divulge all the private parts of the conversation, but I said, what would you do right, what would you do wrong? And one thing she advised me was to have a transition team. And so I totally plan to have a transition team of people from all across the state who come together and put together what that team looks like. Now here's the other thing about a team. A team has to be loyal and they have to be trustworthy. They have to be people that I know and I trust completely. They've got to share my Christian, conservative, Republican values. They've got to adhere to those. There's going to be no trash talk on Twitter. There's going to be no Facebook posting about silly things and using foul language and that type of thing. So I believe the key to the whole consultant deal is finding a team that works together well, that you trust and have loyalty for and to.
Mr. Connor, we now have 9 out of 9 constitutional offices held by Republicans, but there's still room for improvement in the General Assembly. How do you plan to improve support for down ballot races?
Sure. One of the things I like to do, I talked about recruitment, and that is going outside the people we usually see. In some cases, we have folks that start after college and stay with just different political offices, and then become part of the sort of regular people we see. I want to reach out and actually go out and recruit, to look, again, at businessmen, they're conservative, folks that come back from Afghanistan and Iraq, and say, you know what, you can come in here, and then hold workshops. It's one of the things I like to start is, with the Republican Party, is workshops for conservative candidates, where we sit them down and tell them about the process before we get started. Because I'll tell you, again, another experience is the guy running as the new person for state level office. I didn't know anything. And we need some people to sit them down and say, be careful out there. And you've got to be smart about what you're doing, and here's things to think about as you run. And oh, by the way, you don't need to spend all this money, these major consulting groups. You can go in there, and we as a party are going to have debates. I love this. I really do. Whoever the best candidate is, what's great is at the end of this, win or lose, this kind of thing will flush things out. This is great. I want to see that. As chairman, I will crush things like the mudslinging. And I will do all I can to make sure that as candidates come in, it's about debates. It's about forums. It's not about money. It's not about marketing. It's about the candidate themselves and what they believe in. One thing I got to mention this too, with new candidate, is sort of almost getting talking points candidates get many times. I thought about it after the campaign is, like, really, forget the talking points.